Welcome everybody to the People Policy Development Committee for December. First item on the agenda, Alison, is apologies for absence. Sorry.
No apologies today, Chair.
Okay, great. Second item is disclosures of personal prejudicial interests. Anybody? No. Okay. Third item is the minutes for the last meeting, which would have been October's meeting. Anybody happy to move those? Yeah, Jan's going to move them, and Steve, if you second, that's fine. Thank you. Then finally, we're on to the work plan. So just to give a little background to where we are with the work plan, which is the main item on the agenda today. So and it feeds on from what Paxton was saying just before the meeting started then about the pressures that the Social Services Department are obviously facing in COVID. So we put out a draft copy of what the priorities were going to be for our committee for the next 18 months. And Dave Howes came to the meeting in October to speak to us, and at that point he was encouraging us to think about doing some work related to how COVID had affected adult services. But obviously things took a stark turn for the worse in terms of the peak of COVID in the interim weeks between then and November, and Dave made a plea to us through Clive and along with Clive and Elliot, really, at just the week before the November PDC, to say that obviously there was unprecedented challenges on the department, and Dave was very concerned about being able to provide us with resource to support the work that we were doing, and he and Clive particularly asked us if we could delay, which is why we didn't then have the November meeting. So in the interim period since that time, I've obviously had a couple of meetings with Dave around how we could best do some important work with the PDC without putting undue extra stress on the department, which I think is fair and proper at this time. And what Dave asked was that we look, at least for the first priority item, so between now and the end of March, to look at work related to children's services rather than adult services. And from that, we had already put in the priorities that we were going to look at the impact of COVID on carers. So it seemed sensible that we looked in that in the context of what David asked around young carers. So the proposition going forward is that we look at the impact that COVID has had on young carers, and possibly looking at co-producing a policy guidance document looking at what the experiences of young carers have been during COVID, and some propositions about how we can support them better in the future. And I'll talk more about that later on. But I also met with Gavin Evans, who's with us today, who's going to give us a verbal briefing on young carers in Swansea in a minute, and with Simon Jones, who's obviously been with us with the PDC for a couple of years now, to look at the viability of doing of young carers as a priority for the committee. And I think that was a really useful, productive meeting, and I think I was reassured about this topic after that discussion. And Gavin's obviously here today, so thanks, Gavin. Before I bring him in, thank Alison Pugh also put me in touch with Adrian Bailey, who's the Co-Production Development Officer in SCVS, who kindly shared with me the emergency action plan guidelines they developed for carers in the regional partnership board, which doesn't include young carers, but I think could potentially be a starting point for us looking at what we might want to produce for young carers. But I'll talk about that a bit more in a little while. And probably it's a good point to bring Gavin in at this point, so Gavin can tell us about where we are and what young carers looks like in Swansea currently, and then he can go and have his tea. So bring you in there, Gav, is that okay?
Yeah, fab. Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, well, so I can talk for hours, as some of you know. So I'll try and give you a kind of a quick overview of where we're at the moment in Swansea, and then obviously invite you to ask questions about any kind of areas that you might want a little more detail over. And I'll try and keep it a little bit more specific, I guess, around the kind of this COVID period of time, but give you some of the work that's going on in the background as well. So Well, I guess one of the first things that you probably need to be aware of is that we actually commission out our young carers service. So Swansea YMCA currently have the contract for the young carers service in Swansea, and they provide a range of different elements of support. So they do a kind of a youth group and group work sessions for our young carers. They do one-to-one work. So they'll do some assessment of needs and work with young carers and their families to try and help meet their needs. They also run an ID scheme as well at the moment, and we are one of the pilot areas with Welsh Government as well about transitioning from it just being a Swansea ID, young carers ID scheme, to being part of an overall national ID scheme. So that's been a really interesting development. We've had a little bit of additional funding for that as well. And I guess it's quite pertinent to mention that we are, at the moment, we've just gone live with a recommissioning process. So the tender for our young carer service is currently out and open. So we should know by around mid-January then where we're at in terms of who will be continuing that piece of contracted work with us into the new financial year. Obviously, we're expecting Swansea YMCA to re-tender for that, but obviously we don't at this stage know who else would be, putting forward options or who will be successful at the end of that. But obviously that's, an important contract for this area of work. So a little bit then about COVID, and we have regular meetings with Swansea YMCA. We have a small working group that's kind of cross-department that all meet together. And obviously there's been, quite significant challenges for young carers during this period of time, and for Swansea YMCA supporting them. The lady who leads for YMCA's a lady called Agia, and she's worked with young carers for a long period of time. She's very knowledgeable and very passionate, which has been awesome. And they have, like many other areas, developed all sorts of new means of communicating. So they've moved a lot of their meetings with families and group work onto digital online platforms, and they use a lot of online resources now with those families and young people. They've obviously had some short intermittent periods during the year where they have been able to actually have face-to-face meetings. But of course, we're back in a period of time where they're currently not doing that at the moment. But they've also done some survey work for us as well around the views of young carers, and there's been quite a lot of national survey work going on as well. So they have quite a lot of detail that they'll be able to share about the impact that this has had for a lot of our young carers. And some of those include, obviously, they've got, the role of caring is quite different. So within young carers, that's up to the age of 18, as we see it for young carers and the work that we commission them to do. There is a transition then to young adult carers, at the age of 18. So they've been, really focusing on dealing with the challenges that's provided. And what I'd talk to Kerry about is, I think Agia would be really useful to bring the stories of the challenges that young carers have been facing to life. So whereas I'm still quite distant from the work, she has daily contact with young carers. So when we've resolved the recommissioning process, it might be that it would be suitable for Agia to come along and actually really share some of the detail of that challenges and bring the stories to life. And she does do a really good job of that, far better than I could. But, some of the challenges around when they're in a caring role and they're not attending school, it's a lot more challenging for them in the house where they have caring duties and responsibilities as well, and that's very intense. And one of the ongoing challenges that they share with us, pre-COVID, was making sure that they have some time for themselves, have an outlet to see people, get involved in, everyday activities as any other young person would. But of course, going into periods of lockdown has really intensified that. that that outlet. So a lot of them use online means to have that contact, but that's been really challenging for them. And one of the other things that I've taken from a lot of the feedback I've had is the level of anxiety. Obviously, everybody's been, facing the stresses and anxiety that COVID has brought. But for our young carers, obviously, a lot of them are caring for very vulnerable adults. And so their concerns are really heightened about the risks that carries. And so they've done a lot of work around supporting that and the kind of information that they need to keep them safe. And one of the other areas is around, in relation to the risk, is around, going out and about and collecting, doing your basic needs shopping, but a lot around collecting prescriptions. So some of the young carers have that role in making sure that, they have to collect those. And so there's been quite a lot of challenges for that young carers group, as you can imagine, through the year. But like I said, I think it would be a much nicer way for you to hear those more direct stories. And after the recommissioning, that might be something that you'd be interested in kind of taking up. And I know Agir would be happy to come along and talk to you. One of the other things that Welsh Government have done, as well as the ID scheme, is in recognition of the young carers' access to online communication. We also bid into a pot of money, and we were able to secure a further 20 laptops that we've then been able to give to YMCA Swansea, and they are running a kind of a leasing and loaning system out to those young carers who are struggling with that side of it. So there's been quite a lot of different pieces of work going on to support that. And then in the background, away from that work, we have a cross-department group which includes education, adult social services, child and family services, and within that now we have our early help teams as well, where we and health, where we are looking at developing a new young carers strategy. So we've been working on that throughout this year. It's been a bit slower than we would like because of COVID, but we're hoping that will be completed for April. So we're looking at having a 3-year strategy. And obviously we'll be working with the YMCA then to consult with young people and make sure that we are, moving towards co-producing that piece of work as best as we can during these times. So again, that might be something that you would be interested in having oversight of, having heard more of the kind of challenges to see how that strategy looks, whether we're picking up a lot of that detail in the background. I could talk to you more about the strategy, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're after. So maybe if I open it out to questions now at this point, and feel free to ask me about whatever you'd like to.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Has anybody got a question for Gavin? Can't see hands. Okay, Mark.
Hi, Gavin. Thanks for that.
Hi, Mark.
I scribbled down co-production early on in your talk, and you got to it in the end. I wondered how much consultation is taking place with young carers and how able they are to contribute to any consultation, and what means we've got to enable them to do that, because clearly they're the experts in their situation, aren't they? And we need to be in all we do. The current thing we're doing with YMCA in this new spec that's going out for YMCA or who else to bid for to provide the service in future, and for the strategy going forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Front and centre of all of that.
Yeah. So the YMCA, so we started this process earlier in the year, so going back to January, and there's a Young Carers Day, and YMCA organised a large kind of consultation event there to bring all of the families and young carers that could attend into a consultation event and a kind of a celebration event. So both myself and then Elliot, as the representing cabinet member, both went along to that event, so we were able to, you know, directly hear their views, some of their concerns, and to begin that process. And then what a gear in the YMCA will often do then is, on more specific pieces of work, she will work with them in smaller groups, and she's been doing some of that online as well to listen to their views and take some of that on board. So very much the work with the ID scheme is something that the young carers themselves have already shaped with YMCA. And at the moment, they're in the process of doing that consultation with small groups of young carers then around what that ID scheme would look like. And I think we'll very much be doing the same with the strategy around, you know, taking the relevant parts of the strategy to those young carers and having a dialogue directly with them and seeing whether it makes sense. You know, language is always a challenge and a barrier for us, you know, things in a friendly way that aren't full of acronyms. So
Gary might have frozen. Can everyone else hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Kerry.
Okay.
Eyes back. Gavin, I think we lost some of the end of that.
I think he's still. Oh, there, you're back, Gavin.
I'm back in. Can you hear me again?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Gav. Can you remember what you were saying?
Apologies. The joys of technology, hey?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure at which point you lost that I lost you.
Well, I think we'd covered a fair bit about when we were in co-production. Mark, are you okay with that? If you are, I'll bring Paxton in then, Mike White.
Hi, Chairman. Quick couple of questions. That was a mouthful. How satisfied are we, Gavin, that we have identified, or what percentage of young carers have we identified across Swansea? And how difficult is it to get to them as well in that sense? And the other question, of course, is if they are caring, then there must have been assessments of the adults they're caring for. Do we always get offered the assessment for carers assessment at that point in time to see what help and support they need?
Yeah, they're both really good questions. So can you all hear me okay? Because it's kind of flashing in and out at the moment.
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you, Gav.
Great. Okay, so the first question is really relevant, because one of the real challenges that we've got is understanding what our young carers population is, and that's one of the main things that we'll be looking at dealing with within the strategy, because we don't collate the figures to give us an overview of how many people are young carers in Swansea. So we'll be doing work with education around identifying that, as well as how many people actually access the young carers service. So there's a number of layers to understanding our young carers population, and part of that is also the awareness raising of a young carer. So we know that there'll be a lot of young carers that perhaps don't identify themselves because they're not aware that they are in a caring role. So a big part of the strategy will also deal with how we raise that awareness across all sectors, and how we begin to record it. So there's quite a large piece of work, and that isn't just a Swansea issue, that's a national issue as well, is understanding what our young carers population is. And one of the things that will help us do that as well is that Welsh Government will be moving towards making sure that education across the whole of Wales will have to record that on the education system, and will go into the PLASC return that we send into Welsh Government. So we'll have some idea, therefore, about our overall population of young carers. We'll know how many then access the young carers service and how many young carers sign up for the ID card scheme. So there's quite a bit of work to do in that regard, which kind of answers the first part of your question, and that's one of the things the strategy will deal with. The second part, as you've rightly said, is that link with adult social services. So making sure that they are aware as well when they are assessing the needs of any adults and what their needs are, whether there are young carers in that house, and that they're able to identify them and able to support them to access the correct services as well. So that does happen to some degree, but again, we can't evidence how much of that actually takes place at the moment. So we don't, for example, there's not a direct link between all of the carers assessments that get done. And of course, one of the things that young carers have been raising to us in the last consultation is, although a lot of their caring roles are for the adults in their family, a lot of the young carers are also sibling carers. So there's a lot of sibling carers who are actually supporting their brothers, sisters, wider family members in their caring duties there. So it's quite it becomes quite complicated then, and we need to make sure that we meet all of their needs. Does that cover that one?
Thank you.
Thanks, Paxton.
Muted, Carrie.
Okay. Oh, Mike, can you hear me now?
Yes, he was on mute. You're
Yeah.
all right now. Yeah.
It's you.
Cheers, Gavin. Yeah, obviously, we mainly all governors the schools, and as you say, you did touch on education. But have the links been set there with the YMCA, and mainly know that the school works within catchment areas? Feeder schools in the main comps, where we could perhaps get the information on how many pupils that we might have within our areas that we represent, and also the possibility of linking in with our LACs, who can obviously signpost as well. If they identify any families that the children are caring for, to have a joined up working approach, so that we can pull all the strands together. What progress has been made in that area, Gavin?
Yeah, so with the education part, I guess first of all, some of our thinking at this point with the strategy is that all schools, both primary and secondary, would have to have a designated lead within their school for young carers. And they would obviously be supporting the school around the awareness raising and recording, all of their pupils on the database and reporting that back in. And once that data is recorded, as they transition from primary and secondary and across their clusters, then it means that there'd be much greater awareness. So that would be a really good step forward. It also means that we'll be able to report on any issues for that carers group as a whole. So we know from the Estin reports into young carers, which you might be interested in having a look in, they did a paper last year around young carers, that they're often affected in school in terms of their attendance and their outcomes. So there's, they quite often might have late attendances because of their caring needs and things. And that was a big driver for young carers wanting an ID card, so that schools could be aware that they need to have more sensitive conversations with them about lateness of homework, lateness to school, those kinds of things. And very much though, there would be a role in linking with the governor's unit as part of that. So we probably would need to think about, like with the LAC population, you would have a LAC governor. It might be that you have a particular governor who's there around young carers. So we need to have a bit of further dialogue really around that, how we could develop that with governors. But that would be really useful because it would cover that whole kind of picture. And then, of course, the other one you raised is with our local area coordinators, who've obviously, still relatively new and emerging, but they would also have a role to play as well. certainly in terms of the awareness raising. So we'd maybe look at them as one of those key groups that would need to receive the awareness raising training and have one lead within their team to make sure that they are really in the loop and understand how they can support access to services for them.
Okay, Mike. Thanks, Gavin. I've got Erica Kirchner.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Gavin. I love it when you know, we can see ways forward and how systems can be improved to get the motor working, so we give the best for everyone. Chair, I don't know, when you introduced us, you said Dave Howe wanted us to look at children, the children's services, and then you went on to the child supporters. Is there room for looking at other children's issues here? Because the one that I have in mind is around domestic abuse. The homes, you know, with all the shutdowns and the proximity families have to be in. Is there any way we know how those children are? And is there any way we are offering some help to them, and the different degrees of abuse that goes on? Are we clear of all the different types that those children experience? Because this is something very close to my heart, because I know it's intergenerational, and whatever scars are going on now, they will take with them for the rest of their lives. So I'm just really asking Gavin, really, I suppose, are we doing enough? Are we doing anything? Where are we with anything? And what processes can we work on to ensure that they get all the support and help they need? Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good one. It's a big question, isn't it? And it is a, you know, a hugely challenging time, isn't it? Especially when pupils aren't in school, they aren't being seen as much, and clearly and rightly so, we should all be concerned about that. And obviously there's a lot in the media about that as well. So within Swansea, you'd probably be aware, you know, within Child and Family Services, we do have a domestic abuse hub. So that brings together a lot of professionals, and that includes specific and specialist workers around for young people and children who have been engaged or, you know, in domestic abuse in whichever capacity that is. So there's certainly eyes on there. And then obviously they work across all of our teams and partners. So we have a fairly newly restructured early help service. So they work very closely with our domestic abuse hub, as do all of our teams within Child and Family Services. So it's had a really strong focus in terms of our domestic abuse work, and the third sector also have a hub that works closely with our own hub as well. So there's really good links. There's kind of quite good pathways between services. There's been new online services set up as well in terms of making contact in a secure and confidential way, in recognition that actually contacting services by phone is not necessarily safe for people in those situations during the pandemic. So that there's been work going on around it. I don't know, you know, so I guess in the bigger question though is how do we know what's going on out there in its entirety? It is a concern for everyone, I'm sure. And, you know, a lot of that is about regularly contacting and trying to make sure that we've got professionals keeping in touch, particularly anywhere we've got concerns. You know, a lot of services within Child and Family are obviously still doing all their face-to-face visits. So wherever we've got those concerns, people are still visiting, going to the house. So it's, you know, that's been quite a robust process, if you like, where we've got concerns. I guess the issue is where there might be concerns that we don't know about, and that's always a challenge for all of us.
I think thanks for that, Gavin. I think that's part of the answer to your question, Erica. Where one of the difficulties for the committees is is coming up with an area that's defined so that we can do some purposeful work. And I think what we're looking at here with young carers is one cohort of vulnerable young people. And I think by doing this work, we're probably going to come across some people who describing. But it's very difficult to do a piece of work that would encapsulate all vulnerable young people, because it would
I think, Kerry, you've gone, but thank you for that. I appreciate we can't look at everything at once.
Yeah, we've lost the chair for a second. Just give him a second to see if he can join back in. There's some other hands up. Oh, yeah.
Can I just add, because there was a question or a point I had following Erica's question, is that I think we need to be aware that the person being cared for could also be an abuser. It could also be an abusive relationship. They could be emotionally exploiting the child or denying the child, neglecting the child's needs to putting their needs at the front. And we need to be aware of that, and when we're dealing with these cases as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well, Mark. And one of the things that we're looking at in the strategy is making sure that there is a proportionate assessment that's very child friendly and very child focused, to explore the context of what that caring role is and what support needs that they might or might not have. And that's obviously would be asking them, very supportive questions around all of that situation and what works. Because obviously, if there are those issues, then we would need to make sure that, that there was a statutory social work assessment of need, and therefore a different type of support put in to meet the challenge of their caring challenge. Absolutely critical that we broker the right type of service for them.
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's Adele next, and then Elliot, and then Steve Gallagher. Adele, are you there? No. Okay, Elliot, you want to come in?
Okay, so bye. Sorry, I had a phone call and the landline was going off and my mobile, and I thought, oh, I better answer it. I knew the timing wouldn't be good. I think I'm a parent carer of a disabled child, so I run a group, a Facebook group, and so I listen to a lot of the parents really. But I know from first hand, and I didn't realise until about 4 or 5 years ago, that I was actually a young carer, and I was a sibling carer, and I know the impact it had on me, and I know the impact it had on my brothers and sisters, and I'm in my 50s now, and I feel quite deeply for these families, and I would say that children shouldn't really need to be carers, and that if parents sometimes in these types of situations where the sibling has perhaps struggles to regulate their reactions, it can be quite difficult, and I lived with that, so it was kind of living in a violent and volatile situation a lot of the time. And at 10, you don't really know what's normal and what's not. And my youngest siblings, I was the eldest, I sort of became a mini parent at that stage. And by the time I was doing my O-levels, because I'm that old, I wasn't getting any sleep, because I had a 2-year-old climbing into bed with me. So I think, while I think it's brilliant to concentrate on young carers, I've got no quibble at all with that. But I suppose I'm sort of wondering really about the wider aspects of it, and perhaps as a parent, carer, even myself, I do not want to be a carer of my disabled son. I want to be a parent. And I suppose really it's about getting the services in place rather than sticking the plaster on. So that's where I'm coming from. And I know that parent carers have really not had an awful lot of support during the pandemic, and neither have parent carers of older children at all, especially with learning disability. And I suppose really bringing it back again, if these families are left on their own for you know, they're not even having a break from the child being in school, what impact is that having on the sibling carers?
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, and the whole topic, if you like, of carers is vast, isn't it? And it can be very complex. So, like you said, there's the challenges for all the parent carers and the vast array of different challenges that this scenario has brought about for them. And sometimes there are young carers within that context as well. And it's very much, you know, like I said, a lot of our complex child protection and child in need work as well. A lot of the focus is on ensuring the safety in the house, but it's making sure that they also identify where somebody is a young carer, and that part of the assessment also highlights that and looks at what that plan is. And that's one of our other challenges. Again, it's just making that the awareness of what a young carer is across all of the different professionals is going to be one of the challenges that the strategy looks at, because it will take several years. Because you're right, we have a lot of young people and families and sometimes professionals that wouldn't identify that they are a young carer. So when you think, we know we have a lot of children whose parents struggle with significant mental health issues or substance misuse issues. So those issues might be at the forefront, but actually there's a young carer's role in there as well because of those issues. And we need to make sure we identify and deal with all of that work.
I think as well, I've just had a children in need sink, is it?
Yeah.
And I was chatting to the social guy. It was a really useful conversation. And because I'm seen as capable and there's no worries for my child, then they're not really worried about being involved in my life. But me as a carer wants to be able to go and retrain, wants to get a career. You know, so it's a women's issue as well. Sorry, it's slightly off the subject, but I'm just trying to, I suppose really, I think it's great to concentrate on young carers, but it's much broader than that.
Okay, thanks, Adele. Elliot, did you want to come in?
I did. I wanted to respond to Erica's point, but I think we've moved past that now, haven't we? So.
Okay. And who else have we got here? Bear with me, Steve.
Yeah, just picking up on the short point that Eric mentioned, because I sit on the education scrutiny panel as well, we have identified that there may be children, youngsters who are actually being kept home from school, which could fall into this arena of work as well. So it's something that we're looking at in relation to safeguarding, but also at the meeting line in tomorrow. I think I'll raise the issue again, is to consider that we're also looking at as perhaps they are being carers and they don't realise that they're carers and they're being kept home for whatever reason, maybe educated by the parent, but they're also a carer. So there is some sort of crossover there. Just wanted to raise that as an issue, Gavin.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you said, there's a lot of tracking going on with education around who's attending school, and when they're not in school, who's engaging in terms of the blended learning approach that we have. And then of those where there's any concerns, making sure that we are tracking those and trying to understand the reasons why they're not engaging. And you're right, there could be some complexities there for young carers that aren't able to engage because of the caring roles that they're undertaking in the house, as well as, like you said, a whole array of other issues that might be impacting on them.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Les?
Thanks, Kerry. Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce what Mark said earlier about the fact that you can't just assume the young carer, that's all they are. There could be something else, some other dynamic in the household, which also makes me realise that whilst you can have overall processes that you can apply, at the end of the day, every single young carer has got their own individual situation, and you're going to have to deal with their specific situation, because they don't fit into a nice little box where you can apply, oh, this is the one for that, this is the one for that. It doesn't, I can understand that it doesn't work that way. You've got to support them how they need that support, not just a blanket approach. Thanks.
Thanks, Les. Okay, Adele, you still got your hand up. Is that just because you've not turned it off? Yeah. Okay, no problem. Anybody else want to say anything to Gavin before we move on? Can't see anybody. Okay, that's great. Okay, thanks, Gavin. It's really, really helpful. Thanks for giving us your time today. Just to sum up that section then in terms of the first priority, and then I'll just ask the committee members, the councillors on the committee, to approve of the next step, really. So the proposition is that we, for the period from January to, or from now till March inclusive, that we look at young carers around the issue of ensuring well-being of young carers in the context of COVID and the pandemic. And that will include to develop, to capture young carers' views on the impacts had on them, on their well-being, with particular reference to the impact of lockdowns, to co-produce a range of measures that could better support carers to ensure their well-being, identify changes in service provision that occurred during the lockdown that worked well and might want to be continued or replicated going forward, and to build on existing provision of young care support in Swansea. And as part of that we would include the views of a range of stakeholders, including obviously young carers themselves, those that they care for, councillors, Swansea Carer Centre, third sector providers, education, and other stakeholders that we might want to identify. So that's the proposal. As part of that, of our discussions with Dave Howes as well, and with Simon, who's been involved with us for some time, what Dave is asking of us is that moving forward, that we take more of a central role in the work itself. So previously we've had officers reporting to us, and then we discuss it in the committee, and then I've done a bit of work outside of that then with Simon. So what I'm proposing is that we, as we did with transition last year, to set up workshops every month where we can do the work, co-produce the work once we get the right people involved and invited, and then we bring that work to the committee to sign off effectively and to chart the progress, and then to use the committee to move the work forward through the accepted democratic process that we use the committees for. Because I think certainly my experience as chairs, the committees aren't always the best place to do the actual work themselves, because they're obviously bound by rules and regulations around the democratic process, which can make it difficult. So that's what I'm proposing. So first of all, does anyone want to comment on that or question that, or does anybody object to that, or are you happy with that as a proposition? Erica, do you want to come in?
I think it's an excellent proposition. I was just thinking of Gavin's work where they are, I believe, still complying a strategy for young carers. And maybe if we could have a look at that as well, maybe able to help. I was just thinking of linking up with different things, but yes, happy with the proposal, and the workshops are the best way forward in my experience.
Okay, Mark, try. Thanks, Erica.
Yeah, I agree with everything, but I think we should be trying to look beyond Swansea as well to see if we can identify best practice elsewhere, because clearly this isn't a Swansea only issue. So if we can bring other ideas in from outside, that might help as well.
Great. Okay, great. Thanks, Les.
Just really to say, support the suggestion. As Erica says, I think when I've been involved in working groups, as you say, you're not hidebound by processes and democratic procedures. You can just get on with it. You can have a good discussion, brainstorm, etc. It just makes it a little bit easier to thrash it out, and then you can bring it back to the committee to actually do the proper process, if you like. So yeah, support that.
Thanks, Les, and the others. What I was thinking was, which is what we did last time when we had a couple of workshops last year, was that we held them immediately before the meeting, or we held them immediately after the committee. Now the committee doesn't start till 4, so I'm not sure we want to be going on into the early evening with a workshop. So my proposition would be that we would hold a workshop. So the next meeting would be January the 20th, I believe, Alison. I think that's correct, at 4. So if my proposition would be we hold the first workshop, say at 2 o'clock on the same day. Paxton, do you want to come in? I can see you raised your hand there.
Only question I have, Chairman, is whether there's room on the council diary for it. And you need to check that first of all, I think.
Well, it would be, as it's a workshop, it would be that something that we could arrange. I think that's correct, Alison, isn't it? We could arrange that amongst ourselves to some extent.
Yes, correct, Chair.
Yeah, do the work. So it's really down to your availability.
Sorry, the only thing I was going to say is that I'm not sure whether, I don't think it's normal in that sense, but we did have a scrutiny meeting earlier this afternoon, which went on from 2 till 4. And obviously, if you were doing a working group before that, then I couldn't have been there. Okay. That's the only concern I have, is that we need to make sure that we're not clashing anyway.
Okay. That's a fair point, Paxton. So what I'll do is I'll double check that, and I'll come back to you all via email on that, if that's okay. We can double check if there happens to be something specifically on that day at 2 o'clock. The other point then would be, thanks for all your comments. The other point then would be in terms of who would you want to get in there. One of our guest today, Anne Newman, has been quite active on the chat function. If you want to have a look at that, she's made some really good points, and around inviting Agia, who Gavin described earlier, who's the service manager of the YMCA Young Carers Service for Swansea, and just meant Agia was sent notification of the meeting via Adrian and SCVS, but it was at short notice, and so we're hopeful that Agia can get involved with this once perhaps either myself or Gavin could introduce introduction email or something, Gavin, if you don't mind. And yeah, do you want to come in on that, Gavin?
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm happy to kind of coordinate then with you, Kerry, if that's your agreed way forward, about some of the key individuals. So the key individuals from adult social services, from education, and obviously with the GEAR and the YMCA, although right at this point in time, they're probably going to be a little bit focused on obviously resubmitting the tender for the work, which is really important. But you know, I can just see, I'm just catching up quickly on the comments there. It is really valuable hearing Agia and her connection to the passion of the work, and really being able to bring that to life to you. So that would be really valuable, and I could see that, you know, that there's comments around that there, and then she can help us take that a next stage further. And also in terms of Mark's comment about some of the wider views as well, there's certainly some of the Estin peer reviews as well that bring together a lot of that across Wales. And so I'm happy to circulate some of those to you for background reading and things as well.
That's great. Thanks, Gavin. That's really appreciated. I'll liaise with you outside of the meeting. That's okay. There's also, as part of Mark Child raised the point earlier about the importance of co-production in this. We want this very much to be about that, and in that context, the draft co-production strategy from that Jane Whitmore's department has been writing. I've got a copy of that. I'm not sure at this point whether I'm allowed to share that. I'd have to check with Jane. It's going through cabinet, I believe, whenever the next cabinet is, I think. At which point, obviously, it'll be available for everyone. But if I can share that, I'll share that with everybody that's on the mailing list through Alison, and also the CARES emergency action planning that I mentioned earlier, which Anne has mentioned today, does actually apply to young carers as well. So I'll get that shared around as well, which can be some reading for you ready for the workshop on the 20th of January. So I'll get that circulated around you, so you can see that, so that we're making sure that we're that we're working within the framework of co-production. But I think AGIA is going to be crucial in us identifying some young carers as well, who can hopefully attend the workshops as well, and we can have a conversation about them attending the committee as well, if that's what they would like. And I think I think it's really important that we do it in a way as well that we don't we don't do it in a tokenistic way. I think that's really important. Okay. All right. If there aren't any other comments or queries, that's the end of the meeting. Can I thank everybody for attending? Can I thank also the parents and the carers who came on today? That was really helpful. Adele, who spoke, and who's been really active in the comments. It's always really nice to get that perspective on things, rather than just hearing from us councillors all the time. So interesting as they are. So anyway, thanks everybody for attending. The next meeting is 20th of January, as I said, the next committee meeting at 4 p.m. Have a lovely Christmas, and hopefully we'll all have a much more positive New Year. Okay. Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, everybody.
Nice to see you all. Nice to see you. Have a good one. Take care now.
See you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Jenny. Bye.
Bye all. Thanks.
Hello.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.